I believe we are live. All right, welcome back to another Skills and Drilled episode. This episode, we're going to be talking about tackling. We have Ryan Swingle on, Steve McGrath on as well. Guys, how you doing tonight?
Wonderful. Doing fantastic.
We're going to get to the podcast a little bit. Steve has an update on that. Then we're going to get into the skills and drills. But as always, before we get going, we have to give a big shout out to our sponsor, Team Builder. If you don't know about Team Builder, they provide strength conditioning software to more than 500 high school programs nationwide, as well as the NFL. Right now, Team Builder is offering a free 10-week spread offense tempo training program when you start a 14-day trial. Use the promo code VICTORY, VIQTORY, to be hooked up with all of that. So, Steven, tell us a little bit about the podcast and what we have new going on.
Yeah, so this week had a great privilege to talk to more than a couple guys, both past and future NFL players. So next week, we're going to be putting out 2 episodes. Damian Lewis, LSU national champ, and Jack Driscoll, former UMass guy that just got his MBA at Auburn. 2 guys that are definitely going to be playing on Sundays next season. And got a couple, like I said, a couple more. Lofa Tatupu, Mike Minter from the Panthers, and we also talked to Usama Young, former defensive back. So a lot of good stuff, a lot of guys that are doing some really good things after their careers too. Coach Minter with Campbell Camels right now. Lofa launched a CBD company, Zone In, and Usama Young works with player development, player engagement in the NFL, and he also has a foundation, Believe in You. So a lot of guys that use that platform to do good stuff after their careers were over.
Perfect. And just so everyone knows, let them know where they can listen to the podcast.
Sure. Oh, man, it's a long list at this point. Go to victorysports.com, click on the podcast page. You can get a link to everything, but it is on YouTube. It is on Spotify, iTunes, iHeartRadio. I mean, pick your favorite podcast platform. You will find it there. And right now, Josh Martin is the most recent episode, a guy that just wrapped up his 7th season and is also doing very cool stuff with his platform.
Absolutely. Good. So that's the Victory Beyond the Helmet podcast.
That's right. Beyond the Helmet.
Beyond the Helmet podcast. All right. So we're going to get into our skills and drills portion of tonight. And what I've done is I've pulled up just one drill in particular that I'm going to go over. It's a base fundamental drill that you can do at home. And then Coach Swingle's got a really cool presentation just on circuit training and training with multiple drills and how you can implement those into your practice. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we're going to talk about just a fundamental drill that we do here at Bellingham High School. This is a day 1 drill for us. And the purpose of this drill, you guys can see my screen, right? Everything looks good? All right, so perfect. So what this drill is, it requires obviously partner up. So this can be, especially right now in this time where you're at home and you might not have a pad, it can be a towel, it can be anything that rests against the hip, just because the shoulder is going to be going into the thigh or the hip, wherever the coach wants it. But essentially all we're doing is just a low contact drill here. So what you're going to see, and I'll run it through one more time so you guys will be able to see it. Okay, and that's all it is. And all we're trying to teach is feel of the tackle. So we're trying to get that shoulder pad into that thigh mid-waist area. We're trying to wrap the hands around the legs, and we're trying to get the head to the side with the eyes up. So there's so many coaching points in this one little drill here, but we usually we use it mostly for feel. Okay, and we're really trying to bring those arms. And I always tell these guys, try to hug those thighs as tight as possible when we're making contact here. And essentially what you want to do is run the feet as well. And I know some coaches are looking at this saying, well, you know, he's not taking them to the ground. Yes, that's true. But this is the very first progression in getting a feel of the tackle. And we usually like to run this with our younger guys too. Maybe the kids that are 8th, 9th grade that haven't tackled before in their life. Okay, this is a good day 1 drill to get their bodies familiar with making contact with the thigh and with the hip area here. So I have a couple clips. This is, you know, we do a pretty good job here of getting the head to the side, the hands wrapped up, and then running the feet. I got a few clips here. And coaches, feel free to dive in at any point in time if you have questions or want to make any points.
Yeah, actually, Chris, as you're going through this, as your defender there is wrapping up, are you okay with his head in terms of how high up or down it is? I mean, would you rather be able to, you know, have him still sort of looking up, or are you all right with the technique just in terms of his head uh, sort of looking down as opposed to being kind of looking forward?
Yeah, that's a great question too, because the way we teach it is the hawk style tackling, which is popular, and I'm sure Coach Nuggle will talk about it too. The whole days of getting that head across the tackle and really, we're trying to take the head out of the tackle, right? We're trying to be as safe as possible. So what we're trying to do is go same shoulder, same side, and we're just trying to get that head to the side. Now, to answer your question about the head height, it is a little bit high here. We would like it around the thigh area. Okay, and the way we teach it is you can't run without your legs, right? And that's how we want to teach the guys is tackle low. I know there's a million different tackling philosophies out there, and there's not one right one, right? And I don't think there's one wrong one either. But the style that we believe in is the hawk style tackle. We're trying to get that head to the side, and we're trying to get, to your point, Steve, he is a little bit high here. We'd like it probably about here, and we're really trying to run those feet.
Well,
Okay,
actually,
next clip.
That's a great point. I just meant looking up.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. When you're saying when he's hitting, let me stop it right here. Yeah. His eyes should be up a little bit. Yep. And we always want to bring our eyes to the contact point. Okay. If our head's down on the ground, that's when you get stiff arm. That's when you get buried into the ground. So we're really trying to get our eyes to the side and then get them up. It will also help prevent concussions as well. Okay. And then here's another point here. This is hitting it from the other side. That right arm isn't too bad when he's wrapping the thighs, and we're really trying to drive through. Okay, let me run it back one more time. It's a pretty good rep. So I want to get to the bad here, okay? So here's one more clip of the good. And this is why I love this drill, because it exposes poor contact to the midline. And I'll show you here. If I run this through slowly, you're going to see his head's down and his shoulder actually hits in the middle outside of the pad. And what this drill actually does, it will expose you if you have poor contact on the bag. And what you're going to see here is because his head's down, his shoulder hits on the middle inside part of the bag, he's going to naturally start to spin off. Okay, and this is where you get your missed tackles, especially on one leg, or like I said, you get stiff armed, because that head is buried down and that shoulder isn't hitting flush like it should, square across the midline. When we tackle, we want to get both thighs, not just one thigh. So we see the contact point here. His hands are okay. He's a little bit high. You see his butt's a little bit high. He's a little bit hunched over. We're trying to get that chest up, that head up, and then explode through. And I'll run this full speed here so you're able to see it.
Yeah,
go ahead, Ray.
No, I think that's a good point that you just made as far as keeping that chest up as far as that, and keeping the head up too. I think it allows for better transfer of energy from the ground. Because I feel like a lot of movements that we talk about throughout the sport is just generating force to the ground and trying to find the most efficient ways to do so. And kind of like you alluded to, when you are off center and have that leaned over body language and posture, I think you're going to see exactly what happens in this drill when there are missed tackles, as the case would be here.
Yeah, and it's a great way to expose it too, right? And we could say all the time, we could look at film, we could bring a kid into one of our film rooms and say, hey, this is what you need to do. But this, you can straight up show him, hey, you're off-centered here, your head's buried, and this is why it's happening, right? We always like to teach the why in football, and kids always want to know the why as well. But I was able to bring this player in, and this is the why, where, hey, you're swinging way off of there because your contact point isn't through where it needs to be. Your hands aren't wrapped and your head's buried, right? And just as I'm running it through here, and then we fix it, right? We go back to it and we show them it and we fix it the next day. So, as mentioned, I like this drill from a day one perspective. It's low impact. It's safe. You're not going to get any kids hurt. I go back 2 clips here. You see the kid hobble a little bit as far as trying to keep his balance. We're not taking it to the ground. That's one of the big points too. But as far as being uncomfortable in a tackling drill, the guy holding the bag, this is as uncomfortable as he's going to be. He's not hitting the ground. He just has to take a couple hop steps back. So,
right.
For us, it's been successful, and like I said, it's easy for us to diagnose and easy for us to troubleshoot, and it's helped us improve our tackling over the years as well.
Do you teach them to lift and like snap through their hips as they drive through, or are you just trying to get them to drive straight through the point of contact?
Yeah, I want them to lift and drive through, but what I'm mostly concerned about is getting the wrap, right? And
right.
One thing we're not going to cover in this skills and drills, but we will the future skills and drills, is the approach. And I think the approach, a lot of missed tackles is missed because of bad footwork and approach. Mm-hmm. Okay. Here, I'm just more focused on getting the feel of getting thighs wrapped and running the feet.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Because I don't want guys to stop running their feet when they make contact, and then B, obviously not being able to wrap thighs properly and really get that squeeze in the legs when you make contact. So that's all that this drill is working here. But yeah, to answer your question, we want to get that drive and that lift. But most of it is going to be just predicated on getting the feel of making that tackle.
Right.
I'll run through one more time. Perfect. All right. So what we're going to do now is, Ryan, I'm going to swing it on over to you.
Cool.
And if you're ready to go.
Good to go. All right.
Yep.
So I'll be talking about a tackling circuit here real quick. I know it's not necessarily a drill in and of itself, but I think it's a good way as we're trying to find efficiency as we work more into an in-season or a preseason spring ball, whatever the case may be in your area. I do believe that it's important to tackle every single day. Because at the end of the day on defense, it's about getting guys to the ground, being able to efficiently tackle, being able to effectively tackle in space, in congested areas, in the box, outside of the box, whatever the case may be. If you can't tackle, you can't play defense. I think this is a great way to try to maximize practice time, maximize efficiency during that practice time, and get good reps, good coaching points in that quick hitting session each day. So I'll go ahead and share my screen. We can get into it here real quick. Present. All right, so tackling circuit. 3 main points we want to work on during this is however you want to structure it, however you want to pack the drills into the circuit. Number one thing is efficiency. As we'll get in the next slide, I'll talk about getting all of this work done within a 10-minute period, so that way you're not spending 20, 30 minutes, depending on how you structure practice, whether you have a whole day dedicated to defense, whether you split the practice in half, go half offense, half defense. Want to try to get the most out of that practice time that you have available during the week, whether it be in a spring ball, during a fall camp, or in the season. So efficiency, form, working on good form, and whatever the drill may be, making sure that we are giving the proper coaching cues and making sure that we are doing things in a manner that we're getting better and not creating bad habits. And then obviously football, no matter how much people want to change the game, at the end of the day, it is a violent sport, and we're all about making it safer and whatever, but we have to do it with violent intent and finish tackles with a sense of violence and a sense of urgency. So 10 minutes of tempo. So breaking this thing into a 10-minute period, getting as many reps as possible. So talking about trying to limit the amount of outside conditioning is my philosophy as a coach. So at the end of practice, not running gassers, not doing things like that where we're just trying to tire guys out, but using that tempo throughout practice and using this as many reps as possible during this time to work on that in-game conditioning. Because at the end of the day, you're not running an offensive lineman or a defensive back. Maybe one play you'll run more than 20, 30 yards within a given play. So having those short, explosive reps while doing as many reps as possible in a 10-minute period is the big emphasis here as far as the tempo and sense of urgency. Breaking this thing into 2-minute periods, like I said, getting as many reps as possible, having a sense of urgency into those periods, and then 5 groups, 5 stations. So breaking into 5 groups, a big skill, DBs, linebackers, overhang guys, whatever the case may be, however you want to structure your defense, whether you're a 4-2-5, 3-4, whatever the case may be, breaking that into 5 distinct groups so that you can have 5 different stations going at once to create that 10 minutes of tempo. And I truly believe in tackling every day, like I alluded to before. I think it's something that people can get bored with, but at the end of the day, efficiency in tackling and being able to tackle well as an entire defensive unit is what's going to get you results and have success on the field and put wins in the win column and keep losses to a minimum. So working on this every day, keeping it efficient, getting the most out of every day during your tackling circuit is big here. Coaching on the fly. So with that 10 minutes of tempo and trying to be as efficient as possible, you're not going to have the time after every single rep to go through and critique the player's form on every single thing. So I think it's important throughout the season, throughout the spring, and throughout this time, while we do have a little bit of downtime, is to really go through and nail down what are your coaching cues for tackling. What are your buzzwords going to be so that you can use a 1 to 2 word phrase where you can spit something out in 2 or 3 seconds and your players know exactly what you're trying to communicate to them in that short amount of time to get the most out of every rep. So whatever the case may be, whatever your tackling philosophy, not saying kind of how Chris was talking about earlier, there's 1,000 different ways to tackle, and there's 1,000 different ways to tackle the right way. Whatever you believe in, finding those buzzwords that you can translate those techniques and those long drawn out periods that you are going into explaining the exact techniques into those 2 to 3 cues and buzzwords that you can use for each drill, I think is a big thing to work on at this time of the year in reference to this drill. And also having that pre-understood understanding of the drills by the players. So while we do have this downtime, while you are having an install time during fall camp or during spring ball, going over the drills before you actually go out onto the practice field. So that way, once you are out on the practice field, you're not just jumping into a drill and having to explain it, but you can just get into the drill as opposed to sitting there explaining it for 5 minutes. And now you're turning this tackling circuit into a 30-minute long project as opposed to 10 minutes of efficiency, getting as many reps as possible.
And Ryan, when do you recommend coaches do that as far as like getting structured with the drill? Do you think that's a coaching, like they need to do it in the meeting time, or do you want to have the players walk through it as well in pre-practice?
Yeah, I think a combination of both. I think having some sort of a reference tape to either we've done this drill in the past or, hey, I went to this clinic and I did some research and I got a bunch of film from Alabama, Georgia, and this is how they do their tackling circuit. And I really liked how they did this thing and we haven't done it before. Well, let me go out and find some film or go out beforehand and explain it on the, and then also either if you haven't done it and you found something on your own that you're like, oh, I want to tweak this version of doing something into my own way of doing it, finding a couple guys outside of the meeting time before the meeting to go through and film something. So you can give those guys a good visual of what they're trying to do. And then also, if you have never done it before, going out and walking through it before practice if it's something that is important to you. Obviously, you don't have time to walk through every single little detail, so it's kind of seeing what's the most important and focusing on those aspects of it and getting the most pre-practice reps, whether it be on a concept or on a tackling drill. And I think if you're going to do something every day, I think it is important before you do it the first time to make sure that there is a clear understanding. So I would put an importance on this grouping of drills in order to go through and have some sort of a pre-practice time dedicated. But I think as we're in this quarantine, self-isolation, social distancing period, I think this is a great time to share with the players at least a visual, maybe giving them their own at-home adaptation of how they can do some of this stuff on their own, and then working in an everyday tackling circuit that's a low impact thing they can do with some stuff they might have at home. And obviously coaches can be creative and players have to be creative, as we all are trying to be during this time, to try to get the most out of the time that we do have available. Yep. With limited resources.
Yeah, and Ryan, I would just add too, as far as on top of the circuit training you're doing, try to film everything that you possibly can film. Absolutely. I know some teams don't have iPads. If you have phones that can simply upload to Huddle, I recommend that as well. But you know, if you are going to coach on the fly, you need to film essentially on the fly as well. That Absolutely. Way you can look at the film afterwards.
I could not agree more. I think that's a great point, and that's something that we did not do a good job of at last year at the place that I was at. I know that we were making some changes when I was there, and definitely a point of emphasis that I would recommend, because if you do have those, and like you said, if you are trying to coach on the fly, use those buzzwords, and you can't get into the details while you're actually going through and doing the reps themselves, it's important to have that visual feedback and setting time aside with the players to go over not only just team periods, but also drill periods where you are filming those drills and making sure that the form is correct. So you're not just doing it to do it, and now they're not doing the form exactly how it's supposed to be, and they're not getting coached up on. Now it just goes to the wayside, and you wasted 10 minutes as opposed to really getting all you could out of that 10-minute period.
Yep.
And then kind of going back to the one point that I made, having a toolbox of drills. So don't just put this tackling circuit into place and then week one of spring ball, you're doing one drill for the Vise Tackle that we'll talk about here in a second. Week 4, you're introducing another one for the Vise Tackle grouping. And then week 10, you're pulling out some random thing. Make sure that all of the stuff is installed before week 1 of game week. You can install it however you're structured, whether you do have spring ball, whether you do have a fall camp, however long that period may be, before week 1 of actual in-game season reps, making sure that you have this toolbox of drills fully understood by your players, make sure that they are familiar with the drills, and keeping those drills consistent throughout the season. So not just pulling out, oh, I found this new drill that I found this cut up on YouTube from so-and-so, let's put it in week 10. table it for the offseason. You're not going to get that much better in the week 10 while you're preparing for your last game. That would put an emphasis on throwing some new drill that the kids have never done before and creating different movement patterns within that same drill concept. So keeping the drills consistent and rotating that toolbox of 3 or 4 drills for whatever that movement might be, as we'll talk about here in a second, so that you aren't doing the same thing every day, that you can keep some variety within these movement patterns, but also having that consistency as well. So we did break it into 5 different groupings, so we would keep the movement patterns the same. So the first one that we would do, and obviously changing it, and you can have your own take on the Vise Tackle drill. These are all things I feel like a lot of people work on. So if you do have any questions as pertaining to what the drills entail or some drill ideas, feel free to reach out to me. But as we are trying to keep this to more of a mini clinic, kind of going through the general landscape of what we would do as far as grouping. So the first one we'll talk about here is a Vise Tackle. It's a 2-on-1 from leverage. Different ways of doing it. We would just come straight from depth, ball carrier being in the middle, one person taking inside leverage, one person taking outside leverage, really focusing on owning that near hip. So whatever leverage you have, whether you are the inside leverage player or the outside leverage player, making sure that the number one emphasis when you do have a partner to help you vice this tackle is to not lose your leverage and not over pursue. So if I am the inside leverage player, I don't need to worry about that outside hip towards the sideline. I am keeping my eyes locked on that near hip, sprinting to close the gap in between me and the ball carrier, breaking down once I get within a 5-yard circumference of the ball carrier. And then you can do this at varying tempos. You can do different variations where it might be more of a space drill one day. You might slow it down, really work on the form and tracking and gathering, as we'll kind of talk about here later. Or I have seen this one where I have liked that I've seen on some different coaches' posts where the players will start with their backs turned to each other, sprint to a cone, and the ball carrier will pick one of the cones in his direction. So you don't necessarily know right off the bat whether you are the inside leverage player or the outside leverage player as far as from a tackling perspective. And there is a wide variety of ways you can do this drill, but this is a good way to kind of break it up into the first segment that we'll talk about here. Next one is some sort of an open field tackle drill. So whether it's a 1-on-1, a 2v1 where we have 2 defenders and a 1 offensive ball carrier, similar to the Vise Tackle thing, but having it be more of a space drill as opposed to a condensed space drill like we talked about with the last drill. A 1v2, so where you have a perimeter blocker, 1 defender, and then 1 ball carrier. So the defender is trying to get off a block, break down in space, and have an open field tackle, or having a safety playing from depth, a corner, and a 1 wide receiver blocking, and then 1 ball carrier out in space. This is really great as well for the offense getting reps on perimeter blocking, working some of the fast screens or the now screens like a bubble or the return screen for number 1, a bubble for number 2, whatever the case may be, a skim or an arrow from an H-back. So there's a lot of different ways you can do this to get good reps for both offensive and defensive players. But the biggest thing here is, once again, whether it is a 2-on-1 Vise Tackle, a 1-on-1 open field tackle, making sure that whatever leverage we do have, we're owning that leverage, condensing the space, breaking down our feet, shooting hands, making sure we do have a good form tackle like we were talking about with Chris earlier.
Yeah, and this isn't to be confused with the Oklahoma drills that we used to do. Like Steve, we used to do those in high school all the time, where it's just line up 2 guys and bang heads and try to. This is more of. I know the term millennial Oklahoma has come out there, but this is more of just getting people in space. Obviously open field tackle, but you're trying to disengage blocks, and that's really the theme of all this, right? You're trying to disengage blocks in the open and then try to get downhill.
Absolutely. And then just having that good form. So you can, once you are on contact, tap off at the hip, do some sort of a low impact thing. So we aren't constantly having guys bang, constantly going helmet to helmet, whatever the case may be, trying to keep it low impact, trying to keep it safe, but at the same time, working on form, working on owning our leverage, and working on having a good form tackle and whatever technique you are teaching. So the hawk or roll tackle, we did teach the hawk tackle last year. Big fan of it. Chris was talking about earlier as far as low impact, keeping the head out of the game. I think it's a lot of people do talk about making football violent. I think football is a perfectly violent sport, and there's ways that you can be violent while also being safe, protecting the head, and really being a steward for the game of football, and making sure that this is a game that we will be playing 50 to 100 years from now, and something that isn't going to be taken away from us because people are constantly getting hurt. So putting the ego aside, I think is a big thing for some guys who haven't taken heed to the hawk tackle. And at the end of the day, we all want to keep playing this great game. So I think it's something that people need to transition to and need to become more open-minded to if you're not already. So hawk tackle, essentially trying to keep the head out of it, really trying that rugby tackle sense a lot of people will talk about as well. So we can do different variations from both knees, from kind of 4 points of explosion. One knee as we're really trying to drive through and generate force through our whatever leverage you want to practice at that time, really exploding through the ground, shooting our hands, whatever the case may be. Or if you do want to use a tackling wheel, some sort of the pop-up guys, what are the shadow men? We used some of those last year as well. Whatever the case may be, whatever equipment you have on hand, you can do more of a full speed drill, whereas with a partner, it's more of just working on that form. So the main coaching points for the hawk tackle for us were shooting arms, squeezing, snapping through, and finishing on top. So shooting arms, Chris showed it in the first video clip that we're looking at, making sure that we are shooting our arms through so we can get a good wrap and a good squeeze, squeezing him in tight, trying to condense that space and making sure that he no longer has any sort of leg drive once we wrap up and squeeze through the tackle. Snapping through. So I hate the term roll through. I hate using passive coaching terms because this isn't a passive sport.
Yep.
So I think violently snapping through the tackle and finishing on top as opposed to rolling through and then the guy finishes on his side, and that's when we see broken tackles. Not finishing on top in a drill will lead to guys running through tackles in a game. So snapping through the tackle, really getting the guy to the ground, focusing on snapping through, violent snap through, getting the guy to the ground, and then finishing with our belly button on top of him. So
that's a great point. That's a great point, right? Because a lot of teams do that, right? They'll practice here and then they'll roll off, and it's just a missed tackle, right? And I think if you get too much weight going that way, your hands slide off, and then all of a sudden you're missing tackles more than you should be. So I love that term snap through because it really emphasizes getting through and really putting that guy on the ground.
Absolutely. All right, profile tackle. So this is more of a stand-up one, same thing of the hawk tackle, but obviously if you want to teach in front, if you're still trying to keep the head out of it, but teaching to keep that head in front, so be it. It's your choice, whatever. This is more of coming from an angle if the ball carrier was running up the sideline, taking a good angle to be perpendicular to the sideline. You can vary speed, vary partners, vary objects. I do like the tackling wheel. I think they're a great tool for low impact, keeping guys upright, keeping guys doing different things with those tackling wheels. We did not have one last year where I was at, but I have used them in the past. And I think they're a great tool and a great investment for low impact tackling. So just really working on closing the gap between the ball carrier and the sideline, taking a good angle of pursuit, and then really at this point, since you already have leverage, already have a good angle, really focusing on accelerating through the tackle. And I've seen some stuff with Don Brown where they've gone under the chutes on this profile tackle and really worked on torpedoing themselves, essentially, obviously keeping the head out of it, but at the same time, really firing off the ball and shooting through to finish the tackle are some good coaching points for that as well.
Yeah, for sure. And before you get to the next slide, I just want to give a shout out to Tavis Football, who's in the chat, saying we're doing some great things. So shout out to you guys. Sorry, Ryan, go ahead.
Giddy up. All right, last one to talk about here is just track and gather. So similar to the open field tackle, but this kind of slows it down and really working on form. So different crossover drills you can do between these, but really I think this one is more of focusing on form and focusing on that open field nature of the tackle. So we are going to slow the tempo down here, exploding to the ball carrier to condense space. So you can do different forms, different variations, whether it is a vice tackle, whatever the case may be, but really focusing on the form. So we still want to work on owning our leverage, owning that near hip, but really working downhill to condense that space so that we can work in a more condensed space to not allow that guy to make a move in the open field. Limit the space between us and the ball carrier, gather ourselves, so get back into that good football base position, kind of like we're getting into form for a power clean, chopping our feet, breaking down our feet, whatever your coaching point is for that, just so that we aren't broken off in space, and then getting a good fit to whatever your coaching points are for fitting up on the ball carrier. So that is all I have. Obviously, different ideas for all those drills. You can do different variations. I think it's important to have a couple drills in your toolbox for each of those variations, but having that sense of efficiency, having that sense of urgency is the biggest thing you can do within an effective and efficient 10-minute period.
Yeah, and Ryan, sorry, I don't mean to make you do this, but can you pull that presentation back up? Just the slide where where you're showing the different the setup, just so if any coaches want to take a picture of it or want to take a screenshot of at least the setup of it, because I think it's pretty important, right? Because you hit on every aspect of tackling, right? It's not just we're not just thumping up and bringing guys to the ground. We're defeating blocks. We're approaching blocks. Now we're taking guys to the ground. Now we're practicing wrap. So it's every little piece within the circuit. It's not necessarily just banging heads.
And like you said earlier, having as many things built into every drill so you can get most out of everything. So even though there is crossover, even though there is kind of overlapping stuff, they're all focus points of a correct form tackle. So I think as many things as you can get out of each drill in that limited time that we do have is the biggest thing.
Yeah. Yeah, like I said, if you don't mind just bringing that up. And
which one? Sorry.
Yeah, just the first template you had, or the first slide of the practice template. And Steve, like I said, we go back to our days of playing football. Things have drastically changed. What do you remember, Steve? At least while Ryan's pulling up the slide here, just on back when you played in high school. What it was like, at least being taught to tackle.
I felt like we did a good job of having a bunch of different drills that we sort of rotated through. So, some staples, but what I actually think is a better use of this time is to ask both of you, or maybe Chris, while Ryan pulls this up, not to distract me further.
I was not sharing my screen. That is my bad.
No worries. Go ahead, Steve.
I was just going to ask both of you. I definitely vividly remember games where it was just sloppy. There was broken arm tackles, and just that feeling at the end of the game, whether it was a win or loss, just being like, man, that was not our A game. So I'm sure you guys have seen that on some level too. So what, if you're coming off that game where you just, that big plays were given up, not because of anything other than bad tackling, like what's the go-to drill? Obviously going to be telling your guys, hey, we can't be doing this, but what are you guys specifically like in season, right? A little, you can kind of get caught up in the moment and you're so, focused on trying to like get everything, quickly. We only got a couple days worth of practice. What's the number one thing you guys are doing to get your team tackling right when you're kind of under the fire like that?
Yeah, Ryan, I'll go first and answer this here. Mm-hmm. I think my biggest thing is just understanding, what exactly are we bad at? Are we bad at approaching? Are we missing tackles because our angles are poor? Are we missing tackles because we're not wrapping up properly? I like to dissect it into pieces like that. Not necessarily we're just a bad tackling team, right? Because I don't
of course
believe in just bad tackling teams. I think teams are poor at their angles, they're poor at their approach, they're poor at different aspects of tackling. And then to answer your question, Steve, I want to take that breakdown essentially and then work on those drills maybe a little bit more. Okay, so maybe, and I'll just so you guys can see it here, what Ryan has up here. So maybe we're looking at one of the 5 stations. Maybe we take out the wrap station and we add in another approach station. Okay. And one of my things too, and Ryan, I don't know if you like doing this, but I like teaching positions to tackle from the angles they're actually going to see. Mm-hmm. So corners are always tackling from the outside in. Safeties are always going to run the alley down. Okay. Linebackers mostly from inside out. Okay. So if I'm practicing tackling, I want those specific positions to practice those angles because that's what we're going to see in a game.
Absolutely.
Right? If I'm a corner, I don't need to be tackling from the inside out because it rarely happens. Okay, most of my angles are from the outside in. So I think just being conscious of that too, of the position and how they fit in your defense, will help out a lot too.
Yeah, I just kind of going off that point. We would definitely tailor some of the drills to be more conducive, and even I can even think specifically to our turnover circuit as well. Like, when is a defensive lineman ever going to do some of the stuff for a turnover circuit that a corner might do? Never. So we're going to adjust and adapt. And the same thing with tackling, like you said, working on the angles that they're going to be taking in the game, trying to tailor it and cater to the things they're going to actually replicate in game movements is the thing that I think we did a good job of last year. As far as the original question from Steve, I'm kind of along the same lines as you, just finding and diagnosing what exactly the problem was, whether it be were we having a problem with breaking down in space, were we over pursuing, were we not tracking that near hip, were our eyes wrong, was our wrap wrong, whatever the case may be, diagnosing that problem, but then not only just diagnosing it, but also finding a solution. I feel like so many coaches are so quick to point out what was wrong, but not a way to fix it. Oh, you didn't make this block, you didn't make this tackle, or your feet were wrong. Well, what exactly was wrong with his feet? And then what can you do to work on it now to improve it? Or what can you fix the next rep? Or what can we do as a coaching staff to better efficiently and effectively plan the next practice to correct those problems, which I think you alluded to as well. So having that plan in place to be able to diagnose it and then also finding a solution and repping it to get it corrected as soon as possible.
Perfect. All right. Well, Ryan, you can unshare your screen if you want as well. Cool. Just looking in the chat here, we have no questions. We'll leave it the next minute or two for any questions if anyone has it. But until then, anything else, guys?
No, I just hope everyone's doing all right during this time. I know people are getting a little crazy here as we continue through this self-isolation period, but I think the coaching community is doing a really good job of sharing knowledge and making the most of the situation that we're in and continuing to do the things we need to do so we can get back on track to have a great football season coming up.
Yep. Might be a little hard physically for everyone to do things the way that they want to do them, the way that they're accustomed to, or maybe even the way that they think yields the best result. But I mean, you can control what you can control, right? So if you know that, if you're a coach and you can't be with your players right now or communication's difficult, being able to share information, anything that you can do to better yourself, better your team. I mean, at this point, I think the mental edge is probably the easier to gain out of maybe the physical, but just control what you can control, man. And I think that's what pretty much all of us can do.
Yep, for sure. Awesome. Well, I'm seeing no questions in the chat right now, so we're going to end the stream. My name is Chris Haddad, Steve McGrath, Ryan Swingle on here as well. We'll be back Tuesday with a live clinic, as well as next Thursday with another skills and drills. We'll see you guys then.